Hello, Space Monkeys, and welcome to a special episode of Political Fight Club. This is Donald Trump Jr.'s Triggered, Round 2. So, these halves, chapters 9 through 17, are much better than the first half of the book. Instead of a rancid, smelling, smoke-fueled dumpster fire, it's more of just a dumpster. And just as boring and plain and predictable as 1-2, but not without merit. So, I was fairly bored in many areas of the book, I'm not gonna lie. There were sections where my eyes glazed over, mostly when it comes to the media. It was just a dead horse that he did not want to stop beating. However, when he decided to migrate past the beating of the dead horse, he did get into some things that I found very substantive, some things I could bite into, and some things I even agreed with. So we're going to go ahead and prepare the same way Melania prepares for holding the hand of the orange man with the bad comb over before she has to go into public, and dive right into it. So first, I'm going to read an excerpt for you. This is chapter 9, page 147. This goes into Donald Trump's wonderful and glorious work ethic, something that we can all aspire to. And I'll get into that after I read this to you. I remember one Saturday, about 3 months earlier, being out in Bedminster with the whole family, Mike Pence, Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, Chris Christie, and Brad Parscale, the whole Trump team. I forgot who was doing the talking, maybe Bannon, but it went something like this. You have an event this Saturday, and then the rest of the day off. You have one Sunday morning, but you'll be free that afternoon and the entire next day. I guess they thought they were doing him a favor by finding him days off, him being Trump. But I could see the reaction building in my dad's face. Ivanka, Eric, and I exchanged knowing looks. It wasn't a matter of if he would explode, just when. Enough, he shouted. There's only 3 months left to the election. I don't want any days off. If I lose, I'll have all the time off I need. It was amazing to see two different levels of work ethic, those in politics and my dad's. Let's be honest, those in politics do not have the best work ethic on the planet. They, half the time, don't even show up to vote, and from the times that they do show up to vote, they're taking wonderful vacations. You know, sometimes they're taking wonderful vacations when the rest of their state is freezing to death, to Cancun, with their family, who hates them. But I won't name names. So let's get into the work ethic of Donald Trump, why it is so spectacular, and why, no matter how hard you work, you'll probably never measure up to it. I'm just going to be honest. I have the figures right here. I'm going to read them to you, and you're going to feel like a lazy bum. Promise. So this was a leaked schedule. One of his aides leaked this schedule to Axios, so if you are one of those I hate the media types and you don't like Axios, you can take this or leave it, but you can go ahead and look it up for yourself as well. So the schedule goes 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. was executive time. Executive time is television and tweeting. At 11, it was a meeting. Meetings are important when you're the, president. And then at 12, it was lunch. And then from 1:30, it was more TV and more tweeting. And then after that, there was meetings with interspersed breaks until around 6 p.m. And so if you add all that up, the breaks, the time between meetings, maybe a bathroom break or two, you're looking at 4 hours a day. 4 hours a day, maybe 5. Okay? He might have had work late nights. Some presidents did famously work very late and make phone calls very late. And Jimmy Carter, who worked a long time, he was usually up early and was working all day, didn't really accomplish too much in office. So, just because he only worked for 4 hours a day doesn't mean he didn't get stuff done, okay? He got a lot of stuff done, chiefly kicking people off of their insurance. That must have been hard work. Couldn't do that, right away. So, that's not it. There's another reason why you will never work as hard as Donald J. Trump. And that is that out of the 1,461 days that he was president, he visited a Trump org property 428 times. 428, I can't do 8 with one hand, times. And he played 333 rounds of golf. That's 1 for every 6 days. So not only did he only work 4 hours a day, spend most of that time tweeting and talking to Fox News, but he also took a vacation, a little mini vacation, every 6 days. And on top of that, those little vacations add up for you, because you, the taxpayer, were paying for those. And we'll get into those figures later. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that his work ethic is not entirely different than anybody else in Washington. He likes his vacations. He likes playing golf. He likes to work as little as possible. I think the only thing that I haven't seen him do is fall asleep during a speech. But that did probably happen, but I'll have to take a look into that one. If you find a clip, let me know. I'd love to see it. It probably did, once or twice. I've seen clips of him almost going to sleep, but he didn't fall asleep, so I think the Senate still has him beat on work ethic on that one. So this chapter did jump around a little bit, but it's more about election night, so it's more of a story. He's regaling us with the days leading up to the election, the atmosphere, the intensity. And so there's something else that I want to read to you. This is on page 154. Yeah, 154 of the same chapter. And this is his reaction when they found out that Junior's father was going to be the next president of the United States. No, I said first to myself and then to the others in the kitchen. No, they are not going to give in. No matter what the results said, they would come up with some kind of trick to snatch the victory away. They would say the system had been rigged, that the voting machines were all wrong, that some of the ballots had been smudged and didn't count. They'll come up with something. I said, just watch. It says right here in my script to read and laugh at the irony. Well, seeing as this book came out in 2019 before your father lost his election and you said the exact same stuff, yeah, I'd say that's pretty ironic. And most likely, this is where you got the idea. You knew that it was going to be a tough fight. Alright, this book, from what I have read through most of all the other chapters, is basically prepping the Trump loyalists to have even less trust in the establishment, even though his father served them, and I'll get into that later on as well. So, yeah, I'd say that's fairly ironic, and I'd laugh at it if it wasn't so sad, and also if it happened, which it never did. I don't believe a word. I don't believe that this is exactly what you said when you're... No, I don't. Sorry. Sorry, Don. Don't believe you. So, then later on, in that same chapter, it mentions the loss of millions of dollars lost annually by Trump and his family because they decided to serve the people of the United States instead of themselves. They didn't want to enrich themselves, okay? It wasn't about money. It wasn't about deals. It was about doing something good for the people of Pennsylvania. You know, for the people of the Rust Belt, the hard-working people that Don Jr. had worked with, the kind of everyman that Don Jr. is, okay? That's what this was about. It wasn't about enriching themselves. Not at all. Not one bit. Nope. You gotta believe him. He said it. Although, then I thought I should probably look that up. And no, it's not entirely true. It's actually not true at all. Not one bit. They didn't lose anything annually. In fact, their fortune grew immensely as a result of Donald Trump being elected as president. And I have these figures right here. So Jared Kushner and Ivanka made $640 million in revenue during the time that Trump was in office. This is according to Citizens for Ethics. Trump reported a $1.6 billion in outside revenue, also Citizens with Ethics, and Don and Eric have sold over $100 million in Trump org property. Now, on top of that, one deal needed approval from the Secretary of House and Urban Development, who happened to be Ben Carson, who Trump put into office. So if you were to give this, you know, hypothetical situation to anybody, and tell them it was anybody else, Joe Biden, Obama, Clinton's, they'd say, yeah, that's definitely corruption. Well, Yo, boy, Trump did it. Trump and family. They were enriching themselves the entire time. And I actually have more later on that is going to prove that to you as well. So if you are a Trump supporter, I'm sorry you were duped. And I have the information. And that's just a little bit. I don't even have the whole scope of how they all made money during that time. So, but we'll get to that. And that isn't even taking into account the price to you, the taxpayers. You enriched Trump as well. So whenever he went on vacation, you were paying for Secret Service to stay his properties. You were paying for the protection to cover him. You were paying for the fuel. And those figures add up to a lot. And we'll get to that later on as well. So, why do I feel more comfortable attacking Junior or attacking Donald Trump this time than I did last time? Well, as opposed to part one, when he really separated himself from his father in the narration of his story, in this one, in chapter 9, he says, and I quote, "He was happy to help forward his father's agenda and help him accomplish his goals." After he said that, to me, Junior and Donald J. Trump were the same person. They were the same entity. If you wanted to push your father's goals, if you wanted to basically do anything and everything you could for him, that means you were complacent. So if he did something, you wanted it to happen too. If he wanted to sell arms to Saudi Arabia, you were going to help that happen. If he wanted to enrich himself through taxpayer money, you were going to help that happen. And so now, because you're assisting in basically allowing your father to be a robber baron, you know, like you had back in the 19-teens, you know, you are guilty of the crimes he committed as well. And they might not be crimes that you can punish with law, okay? But it was being dishonest to the American people. It was enriching himself with taxpayer money through loopholes. And so, yeah, I'm going to attack your father now because you basically said you're just like him and you were happy to help him out. So now I don't feel bad attacking Donald Trump with part 2 of this and attacking Don Jr. because what's the difference? Aside from, like, maybe the skin tone, one's, like, more tangerine, and one kind of looks like worn leather, and their hair's bad, but his dad's goes this way, and his, you know, whatever. But they're basically the same guy, okay? Basically the same guy. And so that ends chapter 9, election night, and now we move on to chapter 10, a deadly form of hate. So, to summarize this chapter, it's basically about the conservative white Christian Americans being these victims, okay? And so I'm going to point out a lot of hypocrisy here because the first half of the book was saying that all the lefties were victims and they have this victim complex and it makes them meek and weak and they just want all the free things and the safe spaces, and that's why they vote Democrat, because Democrats give them stuff. They got no personal responsibility. But then later on it goes on to say how the real victims are the conservatives, and the real victims are the Christians. Well, what is it? Do you have a victim complex, or do you not? Are the lefties the ones that are, you know, weak and meek, or are you the ones that are, you know, weak and can't stand up for yourselves and, you know, all that other fun stuff? Are targeted by the horrible masses. But if hypocrisy actually mattered to any of these people, then we wouldn't have had 2 Supreme Court justices, okay? But they don't really care about hypocrisy, do they? No, they don't. They just care about the ends. So you can call them hypocrites all day long. It's not going to change anything, but I'm going to do it anyway because it needs to be said, and it makes me feel better because I had to read this fucking garbage, and so, yeah, I need something to make me feel better. That's why I'm drinking. A lot. I've drank so much. I think, like, most of this book I was blackout drunk. Or at least wanted to be. Shall we continue? So, this one, I think, is when I realized that the fear-mongering is just going to keep going full blast, non-stop, until the end of the book. So, let me read you an excerpt from page 160. And this paragraph begins with large bold text, "The worldwide war against Christians. The bias against Christians on the part of the left and the liberal lawmakers is bad, but at least liberals tend to just whine while the terrorists actually act on it." So let's talk about the war on Christians, shall we? So out of 328.2 million Americans, 205 million of those are Christians. That's around 75% or 65%. And that's according to Census Bureau, Wikipedia, other ones. They usually range between 65 and 70, okay? It's not 100% accurate. A lot of people get missed during the census. But there's the majority of Americans are Christians. And then there's more Catholics. So all the other ones are far smaller in number. But let's continue. So, bias against Christians on the part of lawmakers was something I found particularly interesting, so I looked it up. So, 88% of Congress is Christian. 87% of the Senate is Christian. 42 of the 45 presidents were Christian. Now, there have been 46 presidential elections, but Grover Cleveland was the 22nd and the 24th, so we only had 45 presidents. I'm not dumb. And 91 of the 115 Supreme Court justices were Christians. Okay? So, there isn't a large bias against Christians in lawmakers. There isn't a large bias against Christians in the average population of the United States. There isn't one in Congress. There isn't one in the Senate. There's no bias against Christians at all. If anything, there are more laws that are put into place with Judeo-Christian like mindset and ideals behind them than any other religion. So if you look at the recent thing that you might have heard of in Texas, where they have shortened it to where basically most women aren't even going to know they're pregnant by the time the deadline is for abortions, that law is only in place because of this idea of life and this, how sacred life is. Well, that comes from Judeo-Christian values. And I'm not saying life isn't sacred, but I'm just saying, like, that is one instance. There's a million instances of laws that are pushed because of Christian values. I can't name one law that's pushed because of Muslim values, or one law that's pushed because of Hindu values. I'll wait. Look it up, find me, okay? Tweet me. Do whatever you want to do. Prove me wrong, because you're not going to. However, it gets worse. So, that is worldwide. Now, he does point out there are Christians being murdered worldwide. That's not wrong. There are Buddhist monks that have killed Christians. There are Muslims, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISIL. They all want to kill Christians, okay? And I get that. It can be very dangerous to have that faith, but not in the U.S. And this is who this book is for. It's for the people in the U.S., to make them scared, to make them feel victimized. And so, later on, this is page 163. When some homegrown piece-of-shit militia group commits a terrorist act, however, the press will run out of ink calling its members Christians. Even its use of the phrase white supremacist is a lightly veiled pseudonym for Christian. Is it? So every time you hear white supremacist, you're like, oh, yeah, it's not that they're racist pieces of shit that hate, black people or brown people or yellow people or any other people. They love white people. It's them dirty Christians. They probably go to church. Maybe even on Wednesday and Sunday. That's what you think when you hear white supremacist. Everybody knows it. It's right here. Don Jr. knows it. Yeah, white supremacist means Christian. Because, all the media outlets, they hate Christians. Hate them. It's not like they're running Christmas commercials in the middle of October. No, they hate Christians. Hate them. And so, later on, it talks about Judge Barrett's fake, whatever, where they're like, oh, we're gonna interview you for the job, and they ask stupid fucking questions instead of real good questions. You remember that? Because I do. It was a fucking shit show. But It wasn't because they didn't ask her actual substantive questions like how come you side with corporations 70% of the time, you know, that kind of thing. It was all about, it was attacking her religion, okay? It was Judge Barrett's religion, however, that the Senate committee targeted. Democrats on the committee blasted her for her dogmatic belief in Catholicism. Yeah, they did. They did, but they didn't vote against her, okay? They did in the House. It was basically like, you know, no, we don't like her. It doesn't matter because they didn't have the things. But her actual, like, the people on the, it was 12-0. She got in without a fight, okay? Barely any fight at all. It was virtue signaling, and I'll tell you why. It's because she sides with corporations. She's going to allow more dark money into politics, and that's what people want. So the corporate Dems, the Republicans, they don't care about her stance on abortion. It doesn't affect them. They don't care, okay? If they wanted to get an abortion, they could get an abortion. They got the hookup. They could go to another country. You know, it doesn't, they don't care about abortion. You think they care about your babies? They won't even give you health care. They don't give a shit about your babies. They don't care about stopping gun violence. You know, they're like happy to kick people off food stamps. Fuck your babies. They don't care about your babies. It's just all this virtue signaling stuff. It's to do the kabuki theater and keep you, you know. So that's what this was, this hearing where they were attacking her for her dogmatic views in Catholicism. They didn't really give a shit. They don't care. It was just all show. It was all theater. They wanted to seem like they were against her when they were going to vote for her anyway, because that's exactly what happened. So, if all this can be refuted super easily by somebody who was drinking, then how come it's a narrative that's easy to push? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because a lot of it is anecdotal, and anecdotal stories carry weight because they evoke an emotional response. And so it's easy to understand why this has some weight to it, especially when you pick up other things in this book. So I'm going to go ahead and read page 161. This is talking about tweets sent out after the attack in Sri Lanka against Christians. So the attacks on tourists and Easter worshippers in Sri Lanka are an attack on humanity, the former president tweeted. I'm praying for everyone affected by today's horrific attacks on Easter worshippers and travelers in Sri Lanka, the former First Lady remarked. But if the victims were Muslim, we grieve with you and the Muslim community, Obama had tweeted. So on that, they're not wrong. So when somebody is killed because they are a Muslim, then everyone is very careful and very deliberate when wanting to apologize to the entire Muslim community. But when somebody is killed because they're a Christian, well, they don't get that same treatment. They still get, you know, people being sad for them, but they never point out that it's because of their religion. Now, I'm not sure why that bias exists. I don't know if it's because the majority of people are Christians, so they feel like they're less of a targeted mass. They don't feel like they're really victims of hate, because that happens far less than attacks against, at least in America. And so whenever somebody's killed for being a Christian, it's very rarely referred to as a hate crime, when that's exactly what it is. And because people have picked up on that, and because they see it, they feel disenfranchised by the system. They say, well, wait a minute, the Democrats never mentioned my faith, and my faith is a big part of who I am. Now, me, personally, I think that most religions are stupid. I'm an atheist, a devout atheist, and I'm going to say that until the day I die. But if you are Christian or Catholic or Muslim or Buddhist, you have chosen those religions because they mean something to you. They give you something, and to you that faith is important and integral in who you are and the choices you make, or at least it should be. Studies show that people really act the same regardless of religion. Like, they'll cheat and rob and steal and kill. Doesn't really matter what. But going on a tangent here. Regardless, to you it feels important, and you want it acknowledged. If somebody kills somebody because they're the same religion as you, because they hate your religion, then that murder was also an attack on you. It's an attack on your faith. It's an attack on who you are as a person. And so you want that acknowledged. And when they don't acknowledge that, then of course it makes it easy for them to say there was a war on Christians, and there was a war on Christmas, and, you know, the left is trying to silence all the Christians and, you know, pat the backs of the Muslims, because a lot of times that's what you see. And so that's why they can push that narrative of Christian victimhood, even though it's absolute garbage, because the majority of the country is Christian. Lawmakers, Christian, you know? And so you're not, you don't have this, you know, faux systemic, you know, targeted harassment of that religion, and yet you can push that narrative. And if you don't look at the facts of it exhibits that emotional response, well, you're just going to go with it. And so then after that, as usual, attacks of the credibility of media, and that just is interspaced in every chapter. It doesn't end. You know, the media's trash. We all know. Okay, we all know the media's trash. You don't have to convince anybody. But then he gets to promises his father did keep, and how bad the media and the government were to him. And so that is something else that also I kind of agree. Now, I don't like all the promises Trump kept, and most of them he didn't, but he did keep some, and one of them he actually defends in this book, and I'm going to go into why defending that is absolute garbage. So, when Trump decided, he made a promise that he was going to move the embassy, the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Now, that's something most presidents have said they're going to do, and they decided not to do it. Now, the reason they decided not to do it is because that is a very volatile area, and they didn't want to cause, you know, they didn't want to cause violence and death, which is weird because the U.S. government really doesn't care too much. I mean, we bomb hospitals and schools, so, like, I guess we don't like the bad press, and we decide the rest of the stuff, who knows. But the media basically went on tangents about how it was going to destabilize everything and cause, like, these big issues and yada, yada, yada. So, page 171, he says, "And how much of the doom and gloom happened when my father followed through on his promise? Practically none. Casualties were minimal. Smaller acts have caused much larger violence and death in the Middle East." Okay, well, let's talk about that, shall we? The move of a building, of an embassy, okay, from one place to another place, that didn't need to occur. It was just like a symbolic thing. Caused the death, now this is according to Politico, caused the death of 37 Palestinians and injured 1,600. According to AP News, ABC News, and The Independent, 58 were killed and 2,700 were injured. Casualties were minimal. Those 58 people, or 37 people, they were human beings with lives that mattered. And moving a building shouldn't be the cause of death of anyone. Not one person. Like, can you imagine if McDonald's was like, hey man, we're just gonna move a couple neighborhoods over, and there was some weird thing where, like, a whole bunch of people had just grown to really like that McDonald's, and they got kind of mad about it, and they were protesting, and then because they were protesting, someone came along and just, like, started chucking bricks, and, like, 3 of the people that were protesting died, and McDonald's moved, and they're like, yeah, well, I mean, people died, but we figured we were just gonna move anyway. You see how stupid that sounds? Because it is stupid. Okay, lives matter more than buildings. Lives matter more than, like, this faux symbolism. Moving your embassy to Jerusalem because it's the capital of Israel, when Israel is committing human rights abuses that we do not rebuke them for and actually pat them on the back for, is beyond insulting, okay? And then you say casualties are minimal, you just brush over it like it didn't even matter, like these people don't matter to you, because they don't. Because they're brown and they're poor and they're from another country, they might as well not even be human. Hell, maybe they would have grown up to be terrorists anyway. I hate that mindset, and I see it all the time, and it's painfully obvious in this book that Don Jr. doesn't give a shit about... If he doesn't care about innocent people in one place, why do you think he cares about innocent people here? He doesn't. He doesn't care at all. And so, just the fact that he glazes over it with less than a paragraph, like 3 sentences, that's all he says. Yeah, you kept a promise, and it resulted in the death of 58 people, and the injury of 2,700 others. And on top of that, later on, it's like 128 countries rebuked us for it. And so you want to make America strong in the world stage, so yeah, let's just piss everybody off. That's great. So thanks, Don Jr. and Donald J. Trump. Good job on keeping your promises. So we'll get more into his promises later. I got a whole list. We're going to dissect that, okay? So after the war on Christians, they move into the like real strong stuff. And this is chapter 11, misgendered, okay? Now, I knew this would come up. The minute I saw Triggered, I knew that it was going to come up with, like, trans people and people with purple hair in college campuses. Like, that's just what you know happens when you pick up a book written by a Republican. Because that weird cartoon straw man, that's just who they go after because it's the easiest one to dissect. But the reason I'm not going to go way big into a lot of things in this chapter because a lot of it's just opinion. He does bring up a story about Kate Scotto in 2019, and she was arrested in England because the story over here is that she was arrested in England because she misgendered somebody. They don't really go into detail about how it was actually prolonged, continual harassment of this trans person. And that she later won her her appeal, and so it goes. One, it's another country; it's not over here, but it's helping instill fear anyway. And it is important to note that over in other countries, so for instance in Canada, they passed anti-free speech laws where you can't say the wrong pronoun. And there are a lot of arrests that happen in the UK due to the Communications Act. And the Communications Act allows people to be arrested for basically insulting people. And it's not even, they don't even have to insult, they just have to, like, someone has to perceive it as an insult. There was a man who was arrested for calling a horse gay. There was people arrested for misgendering. I mean, it's just, there have been a lot of arrests. Now, none of these arrests really end in jail time. It can be punished up to 6 months in jail or a 5,000, I don't know if it's pound or euro, I don't know if they're on the euro anymore, fine. But the fact that there is laws that prevent you from saying, I mean, somebody could come up to me and give me a compliment, right? But say it's something I'm insecure about. Like, what if they come up and they're like, you know, they like dad bods. And I'm like, hey man, nice tummy. And I think that that's an insult when in reality they just really liked my tummy. And sorry for all the color changes. I don't know what's going on. That's just for the phone. So if that's throwing you off, I apologize. I don't really know how to fix that. And so there's been a lot of people that I talked to, and one of the reasons why they go to the right, why they go to being more conservative, is because of this issue. This exact issue and guns. They don't want to lose their free speech, okay? And I get that no one likes being misgendered if you want to live your life as a woman, and it took courage being born as a man, you know, coming out to your family, coming out to your friends, living a life as a female when you know that people can look at you and maybe tell that you were a man, or they look at you and you obviously do look like a man, but you want to live as a woman because that's who you are on the inside, and somebody disrespects that, yes. That's very similar to somebody disrespecting your religion that's a big part of you. They wouldn't take kindly to that. You're not going to take kindly to this. But we can't make laws that punish people hurting our feelings. And there's a lot of, not a lot, there's a fringe group on the left that want to do that. And because of that, it makes it harder for true lefties to win fights for things that really matter. Now, don't get me wrong. Your pronouns matter, and respect for you and the LGBTQ plus community matters. But you can do that without passing laws that infringe people's free speech. Okay, so like healthcare matters, police reform matters, ending the wars matters, getting rid of the corruption matters, but the left is never going to win those fights if we make these ridiculous strawmen that are easy to tear down. So if you are one of these people that decide, oh, somebody called me ma'am instead of sir, we should make a law that makes it to where they can't do that. I want you to reevaluate what you're saying. because that law could be used against you later. Okay? So say that everything changes and you pass those laws and boom, next thing you know, somebody misgenders you and they get arrested and they have to pay a fine or they lose their job and you're like, "Yay, look at me. I got all the bigots." You know, that's great. Good for you. But then later on, there's another shift in the country and now like meat is bad or you know, referring to anybody by ma'am or sir is bad, or saying pop instead of soda is bad. Like, if you can pass a law that dictates you have to say one thing, you can basically shut down any free speech ever down the line. Now, I know the slippery slope arguments are kind of done, and nobody likes to hear them because, you know, that's what they said. Oh, if we let the gays get married, then people are going to be marrying horses and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I know it might be ridiculous, but as much as you hate it, people have a right to insult you. I'm sorry, they do. And you have a right to insult them back, you know? It's not like they are free from the consequences of what they say. But we have to stop fighting for these things because they're losing battles and you're alienating potential allies. And so on this chapter, there's a lot of things that I agree with him. You know, I know trans sports is a very touchy issue, but if a man goes on hormone blockers, testosterone blockers for 1 year, he's still going to have a lot more muscle that he built up while being a man athlete than a female because of hormones, and men muscle density is just more dense. And so, you know, I don't know where I stand on that because I want them to compete in sports. I don't want them to do what they love, but it's also they're really good at it because men typically are more physical than women. And so from a scientific standpoint, now I'm not saying like all men are. I know plenty of women that would beat me in a race and beat me in a fight. And so I'm not saying like all men are better at women when it comes to sports, but professional athletes, that's what tends to be the case. And so I don't agree with everything he said because a lot of it is super bigoted and super strawmanish and doesn't really dive into it well. But from his perspective and the perspective of a lot of people, they're just scared that they're going to lose their ability to say anything. And I could see why that fear is there. So then we move on to chapter 12. The enemy of the people, which is basically just more media hate. And I get distrust in the media. It's always been a problem from yellow journalism back in the day caused by this like competition and sensationalism, which is similar to what's happening now with clickbait and everything else. But it's also like the media's manipulation in 1907 that caused the rise of the federal bank. So there's a lot of times where the media has been used to sway thoughts, or they've just flat out lied to sell things. So like I get not trusting the media, but then he goes on later on to talk about like deep state agents leaking the Steele dossier, and just gets very like just all evidence goes out the window, and it kind of ruins his argument later on. And so I read that whole chapter, but there's not really anything of merit to it. It's just him ranting about the media. And so then you have chapters 13 and 14. Now, 13 is Shadow Band. 14 is The Late Night King of Comedy with Jussie Smollett and the Faux Rage Orchestra. Long title. But they might as well be the same. Same thing, okay? Media's bad, lefties are bad, fake outrage is bad, they're just trying to shut us down, all our conservatives. Now, it does bring up Jussie Smollett and him basically saying, I got beat up by these racist Trumpy guys. Now, granted, yes, that was a dick move, and yes, there are people on the left that will do things like that, that will be manipulative, but using anecdotal evidence to attack an entire side of the political spectrum is very stupid, because most lefties are not going to hire somebody or pretend that somebody beat them up just for likes on Facebook. And on top of that, righties do that as well. It's not like there's only stories of lefties pretending to, pretending that someone misgendered them, or pretending somebody attack them because of their race or because of their religion, you know. There's also stories of people on the right that say, like, oh, well, I got attacked because I was wearing a red hat. No one fucking touched you. Like, shut up. That happens everywhere because people love attention. And you're going to get fake people no matter what side of the spectrum they're on. So, if it can happen in equal parts on both sides, don't put it in the book, okay? It's a waste of time, and it's just there to instill more fear. 3 whole chapters of back-to-back-to-back about how awful the media is and how lefty outrage runs the planet. Okay, we get it, man. You covered that in the first one. Move on. So, then after 13 and 14, it gets to chapter 15, Joe China. This is when I finally had something that I could really dissect, because yes, Joe Biden is super corrupt, and anybody who tells you otherwise is a political hack. I don't like Biden. I've never liked Biden, and I didn't vote for Biden. Just like I couldn't vote for Trump. My principles would not let me. I don't care if it's a wasted vote. I'm not going to vote for somebody because I think, oh, well, they might win, so I want this person to win because winning is all that matters. No. What they're going to do for the country matters. I don't care what team they're on. If they're going to pass things that are going to be beneficial, that's who I'm going to vote for. And so, most things that he says in the Joe China, they're 100% accurate. You can't argue with them. He goes into detail about companies that his son has stake in and the money that he got from China and everything else. But, as I mentioned earlier, and in my part 1, it's all half-truths. Yes, everything he said was absolutely true, and the Biden family has made tons of money off their father being the vice president and now the president, but that's like the pot calling the kettle black, because I have numbers for you, and if you didn't know this, which I didn't know, I did not know most of this, but now you will, and hopefully if you were a Trump supporter because you thought he was less corrupt, now you will understand that that is not the case, and he is grifting you just like every other politician. So, the Blind Trust is run by Junior, okay, who is with his father every day, works for him, and wants to please him, and takes direction from him. Okay, so is it really a blind trust? No, it's not. Trump Org wanted to expand into Taiwan. Okay, this was confirmed by a mayor of Taiwan. I'm not even going to attempt to butcher a Taiwanese name. My apologies. So this was before he was elected, or before he became president, but while he was running, and he was calling Taiwan, telling Taiwan, like, hey man, I want to expand into your country. Now, Taiwan and China have a very tumultuous relationship because Taiwan thinks it's free and China thinks it belongs to China. And so China would not give Trump his trademarks. He would apply for trademarks in China with different companies, and the Chinese government, because they basically do everything over there, it's a communist country, decided, yeah, we're just going to sit on these, we're not going to approve them, they're just going to wait. And they waited a long time. And so he was like, you know what, I'm just going to do Taiwan. I'm just going to call Taiwan while I'm running for president. And so he did that. And then it leaks that he was talking to Taiwan and Trump Org was going to expand to Taiwan. And, well, then when he becomes president and he jumps on the One China policy, which is like Hong Kong belongs to China, Taiwan belongs to China. Basically, if you're Asian, you should belong to China. That's their, that's their thing. Once he jumped on that bandwagon, the trademark applications became official almost instantaneously, okay? Same day. Now, some might say that is just a mighty big coinky-dink. And I would say you're fucking dumb. Because no. But say it is. Say all those applications came through same day, just a whole bunch of red tape, stuff happens. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, okay? You got one. Let's move on, shall we? So, later on, Trump Org decided to sell a $15.8 million penthouse. $15.8 million, which is actually higher than other penthouses of its type in the same location, like 24% higher, by the way, to a Chinese-American business exec by the name of Xiaoyan Chen, Angela Chen, as she goes in America, that has been linked to Chinese intelligence. That is from a congressional report in 2011, way before Trump was in office. So you can't say, oh, well, they just made that up to get... No, it was way before Trump was in office. And she was linked to a company that was a front for Chinese intelligence. And she's still linked to that company. And she paid way more than she should have for a penthouse owned by Trump, who was the president, who got on the whole, like, one China... Okay. That is not a coincidence. But say it is. Okay, you got two. Say that is a coincidence. You know, stuff happens. Maybe they didn't do their homework, okay, because Ivanka sold it. She's not the president. Maybe she didn't know, you know. She can scarcely read. So, of course, you know, we'll give that to you, okay? So, but then Kushner's business, which bought a massive property right before the housing market crash, and so it basically lost all its equity, and it was about to go under, and it could have taken his company under with it. While Trump was in office, whose daughter is Ivanka, whose husband is Kushner, he was doing business with a Chinese financial firm, Anne Bang. Anne Bang is not just some random Chinese financial firm. It has a history of having, poor, like, history of not having right documents, not being able to trace its money. It's just, like, it's also thought to be another front. And because of this, when it was released that he was doing these businesses with Anne Bang, a whole bunch of lawmakers got together and wrote letters to Trump, and then after that, basically, the deals were shut down. So now you have two businesses that work in tandem with Chinese intelligence doing business with the Trump organization while Trump was in office, and you have all of Trump's trademarks coming in the same day that he gets on the One China policy bandwagon. So there's that, but there's more. So on top of that, Kushner's sister has helped push Chinese investments in Trump org projects in exchange for EB-5, immigrant investor visas, which are very sought after. And it's basically, you invest a lot in an American company, you can get a visa to come stay in America. Woo! And a lot of Chinese wealthy people, they want to move out of China, so their money can belong to them. And so that, to me, seems a little bit like, oh, hey, if you invest in a Trump company and Trump is president and you get a visa, you can come to America. That just seems like you're kind of enriching yourself through China, just what you were saying Joe was doing and Joe's son was doing, but let's move on. So there's that. And so there was a state-controlled business in China, Sinosure, which is investing $425 million into a Trump resort. When Ivanka met with the Chinese president, her 3 trademarks were given preliminary approval the same day of the meeting. Then, according to Trump's own financial disclosures, he has stock, investments, or interest in a dozen Chinese companies. So, even if I gave you the first 3, there's a list. He has stock, investments, and interests in like a dozen Chinese companies. When Ivanka met with the Chinese president, her 3 trademarks were given preliminary approval the same day. A state-controlled business in China was investing money into a Trump resort in exchange for visas. Alright? So, that's just China. That's just China. That doesn't go into detail about all the other places that Trump org had business. And guess who was running Trump org while Trump was in office? Don Jr., the same guy that wrote this book and decided, oh, hey, we should go attack Joe and his family for being dirty when you are obviously enriching yourself off your father's office. There's no doubt that this evidence right here, and you just, oh, this is just harmless business, we're just doing business. Okay. You should have sold all your stake in the company. You shouldn't have been able to do that business if you were really trying to assist the American people. So then, Chapter 16, the opposition. That's just yelling about the opposition, the Democrats running for office. And yes, the insults seem like they are probably written by a 5th grader who was about as interested in politics as, you know, your regular layman. Like, go up to somebody at McDonald's, you know, that's just working, maybe a teenager, doesn't really care too much about politics, and just have them make fun of somebody they've never heard of. Boom. That's what the jokes were. They were awful, and so didn't really care too much about that. And so then it gets to Trump, chapter 17, Trump 2020, the last chapter in the book. Okay. And as you notice, no, this book did not age well. Trump 2020 did not happen. But, good for you for, hoping it would. I like your optimism. So there's more media hate. Okay, a lot of media hate. But I want to get to a point in this chapter that he lists all the great things Trump has done. Okay? And Trump did do some good things. I mean, he didn't go an entire term in office without accomplishing a single good goal. There were some things that Trump did well. I don't think it outweighed the bad that Trump did, or the pain that he caused, or the polarization and damage that has happened to American society because of him, well, assisted by him. But he talks a lot about let's make America, like he was happy to make America great again. Okay, but let's dive into that, shall we? I know this video's long, almost at the end of it. Thank you for hanging out with me while I rant. But we're just going to get into some other facts here. So they talk about fiscal responsibility. Trump's trips alone to golf courses cost $14 million for taxpayers. That's just to his Trump org properties. That doesn't go into, his son staying in New York, shutting off roads for all their protection. It doesn't go into every single trip that his family took. Then, on top of that, you have his increase to the military budget, consecutive increases to the military budget. He increased the deficit by giving the wealthy major tax cuts. Okay, so no, I don't really care when you ask how we're going to pay for medical coverage, because you don't give a shit about paying for anything else. You just print money, and so that argument goes out the window, evident by this. So he increased the deficit, he increased military spending, he wasted millions in taxpayer money, he increased spying powers, which, yes, we all are very happy that anybody working in the NSA has all the access to your horrible porn. And it is bad. Your taste is awful. Yeah, I'm talking to you with the forehead. Some weird shit on your phone. But let's move on. No border wall at all, even though he got funding like 3 times until he decided that he didn't want to tell them how the money was going to be spent. Okay? He gave the repair job to fix Puerto Rican power lines to a company that donated thousands of dollars to his campaign when it only had 2 full-time people, so that's a thing. There were 3 million less jobs prior to COVID. So he lost jobs before COVID happened, and that's according to Labor Department statistics. Tariffs now mean that 40% of farmers' income is subsidized. So the worst provisions of NAFTA and TPP are kept. Jobs were still outsourced. There's less insured Americans. There's no progress for climate change. Almost killed the solar industry with more awful tariffs. There's almost not a single measurable metric that you can look at that proves Trump did well. Not a single one. American health? No. Education? No. Housing? No. Economy? No. There's not a single measurable metric that shows that Trump did anything good. And he wasn't even obstructed by the Democrats at all. And so then Junior yells about misinformation, but willingly and deliberately pushes it, and is currently being sued for doing that after the 2020 election. He yells about corruption, and he engages in it. He yells about safe spaces, but he wants them for the Christians and the conservatives. He talks about violence being despicable, and yet his father was happy when a journalist that was very anti-Trump got beat up. And he was also happy when Trump people pushed a bus of Biden staffers off the road. And so everything he wants you to be upset about that the left does, the right does, you know? And I don't want to say the right, okay? Because there's plenty of people on the right that are wonderful. I have friends that are on the right. I have friends that are conservatives, and they're great people. But this book is just made for the ones that don't want to think, the zealots. That's who it's for. That's what it does. And so there are tons of facts in here. They are legitimate, they are well researched, they are well documented, but the framing is awful. And on top of that, it doesn't go into detail about who he is, about who Donald Trump is, about the things they engage in. What upsets me most about the Trump era, the Trump presidency, isn't the fact that the American population has grown so fucking stupid I can't have a conversation anymore. It isn't the fact that people have become so polarized that somebody who has 90% in common with you decides that they want to just be on one side and you're on the other side. Instead of seeing that 90% in common, you're just mortal enemies instead of actually banding together. It's not the fact that misinformation has run rampant. It's not the fact that it seems like nobody cares about anybody else because everybody's been dehumanized. What makes me so upset is that Donald Trump captivated the entire Republican side of the nation. Anything he said, they took for truth. Don Jr., anything he said, they took for truth. And what happened? Nothing. They didn't pass laws that ended corruption. They talked about how bad fake news is, but they didn't fight it with legislation, which they could have done. They didn't talk about, or they talk about how, the American worker and how much they need the help from the government to, get back on their feet. But they never did anything to help them. They didn't pass the laws that would make businesses stay in America. They didn't give Americans tax cuts. They just took people off of welfare. And so what bothers me most is that it's just boring and predictable nonsense. And not just from the book. You didn't even have to read this book. You could just look at this book and make assumptions, and you'd be right. It says don't judge a book by its cover, but this one you absolutely can. What bothers me is that it's just all for self-enrichment and money. That's the most boring, absurd motivation on the planet. You can literally change people's lives for the better. You can be remembered as heroes forever. You can go down in history as one of the best presidents and the best cabinet. You could have saved the planet. But no, you just wanted to get more rich so you could what? Give your girlfriend bigger fake tits so you could send your kids to a school where they could go to with other rich heroin and Adderall snorting kids? What? That's all you want? Are you that boring? Are you that shallow? Because I'm tired. I'm 30. I'm tired of being bored. I got a long way to go, and you're telling me I'm just going to be bored with this predictable bullshit for the rest of my life? No. So, that book is boring, dumpster fire, garbage that is framed in a way to make you hate the left and be fearful if you're a white Christian conservative. That's what it's for. It's to make money. There's nothing past that. And that's how it is with the politicians. That's how it is with Donald Trump Jr. That's how it is with Donald Trump. That's how it is with Ivanka. That's how it is with Biden and his ilk. It's all about the money. You don't even have to read a book. You don't even have to be educated. Everybody already knows it. And what's worse is y'all know that already. And yet here you are hating people on the other side because the people that are doing it for the money are telling you to. So just be less gullible. That's all I'm asking. I'm sure most of the viewers here, anybody that made it to 58 minutes and 45 seconds, you're probably not that gullible. Okay, you probably know. You probably don't run around straw-manning people. But if anybody's watching this that isn't, that isn't a skeptical person, that isn't an open person, that doesn't want to engage with somebody on the other side because they see the value in that person's argument in that person's life, if you're not that kind of person, if you're just the kind of person that just hates the Dems or hates the Republicans, why? You know everybody that's telling you that is corrupt as shit and all about the money, and you still let yourself be fooled. And it's just the more I read this book, the more upset I was that we had an opportunity to be better, and we had an opportunity to change, We had people that had the power and the charisma and the drive to change America, but instead of doing it for the better, they just got more rich. And so, yeah, that's all there is to it. That's Donald Trump Jr.'s Triggered. Absolute, unending drivel. But read it if you want to. Don't buy it, though. Don't give him money. Like, go to the library. That's what I would do. I bought this for, like, nothing. It has an autograph on it. My kid spilled coffee on it. So, don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. Probably not going to burn it. I don't even think it's worth the time. So, anyway, thanks for sticking around for an entire hour. I talked a lot, and I apologize. Next time I read a book to you, gentlemen and ladies, and in-betweens, I think I will be much more concise, but there was just so much shit that I had to comb through with this book that you have to suffer along with me. But until next time, you have a wonderful day, Space Monkeys. I'll see you soon.